I say this not to be ghoulish, but with the simple authority of crushed mint or migratory birds arriving and departing. This is dependent on nothing. It is without conditions. I will love you into the grave, yours or mine. If yours, I will plant wild roses at your feet and tell stories to the sweet insects that chatter against your bones beneath the black earth. I will make them reckon with your goodness, and we will tally up together the enormity of your loving. I will love you into the grave, yours or mine. If mine, I will go to it quietly like an animal to the wakeless forest when its time has come. I will have nothing left to ask for. I will have come home and home again every day of my life to rest in the wilderness of your love.
Welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we're going to take a deep breath, slow down, and enjoy some crushed wild mint. Yes, picture the green leaves, taste its coolness, inhale its menthol clarity. So, Crushed Wild Mint is also the title of a debut collection of poetry from Jess Housty, an indigenous writer and land-based educator from the Heiltsuk Nation, who lives with her family in Bella Bella, British Columbia. Well, we all know December can be a bit of a frenetic time. We can easily become trapped in these kind of black holes of distraction. However, for this 1 hour, I invite you to sit back and enjoy the rich imagery of Jess's writing, the language of which is infused with her landscape. So hello and welcome to you, Jess, up there in British Columbia.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So I've followed your wonderful essays for some years now in the Tyee newspaper, and clearly your sense of place grounds you and somehow magically merges with your DNA, and it feeds your creativity and your spirit. So to help us gain a little understanding of where you live and how the wilderness, the fresh air, and water are the essential elements, you say, that fuel your work, perhaps you'd be good enough to read a little bit from one of your essays, and it's called Winter is for Regeneration, the Gardens and Yours Too.
It's December, and the hard frost has finally crusted into my garden beds and transformed the mazes between wild berry bushes in my yard into a beautiful network of ice crystals in the dirt. Lately, I've turned to our stores of preserves to keep our family fed, our dehydrated and frozen stashes of herbs and vegetables diligently harvested by my children over the spring and summer and into the first cool months of fall. It appears that our gardens are at rest now, but I know the deeper work that supports our seasonal thriving is still creating magic in our raised beds. Beneath the frost, the layers of kelp mulch and decaying bracken fern, the soil is rebuilding itself with deep inhales of cold winter air. I live on the outer central coast, where my ancestral motherlands stretch from the mainland through networks of islands to the open ocean. Pre-contact, our Heiltsuk people lived in more than 50 permanent and seasonal villages across over 35,000 square kilometers of land and sea. Now, we are primarily nestled in the community of Bella Bella, facing east from Campbell Island, in a community where nearly half of households are engaged in growing food at their homes, and almost every household is engaged in harvesting it out on the territory. There's a false belief that gardens can't thrive here, but I believe in abundance. And much of what I've learned about how to nurture plants in this environment comes from watching my non-human kin flourish. Grizzly and black bears pulling salmon carcasses into the forest to fertilize the bursting riparian areas, the world shaping itself around the pathways of water, the reciprocity of thinking in whole systems. My ancestors tended root gardens, orchards of wild fruit trees, medicine patches, and swaths of berry bushes. They believed in abundance too. I grew up in a family where self-sufficiency and localized food systems were upheld as an intergenerational ideal, And alongside my parents and grandparents, I got to play a role in supporting the food security of my family and our kin by growing gardens and harvesting wild foods, nourishing our spirits in the gathering and our bodies in the feasting. And now I do this beautiful work alongside my own children, whose small hands gather berries and plant radish seeds and pick peas through the seasons of abundance. Small hands that also wait patiently during the seasons of rest.
Gosh, that's so beautiful. Even if you weren't a gardener, it would make you want to go and garden. So you speak often, that word abundance comes up a lot in your work, and it seems to refer to an entire set of values in your culture. You have a respect for nature, and that includes plants, animals, insects, and just Mother Earth's bounty. And it seems to infuse your life in a very kind of uncapitalistic manner. At one point you said wealth is measured not by what you've accumulated, but by what you give away, which is very antithetical to our culture. And that true abundance comes from community and turning gifts into more gifts. And you demonstrate this beautifully in your poem, 68 Plums. So would you mind telling us the backstory to how you wrote the poem? And then if you wouldn't mind reading it also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that is a real ethic in my community and in my culture, that when you think about people's rank in society and the way that we relate to each other, it is very true that the sense of wealth that people have comes from their ability to be generous. It's not about how much you hoarded unto yourself. It's about how well you've been able to take care of others, which is I think, a really beautiful mentality. The story behind the poem 68 Plums is very simple, and it's a mystery that I still haven't solved. That one day I came home and there was a bowl with 68 golden plums glowing on my doorstep. I have no idea where it came from. I mean, I know that it came from a tree, one of the many plum trees in the community. I don't know who picked them. I don't know who thought of me, but it just seemed like such a beautiful gift that I couldn't think of anything else to do but write a poem and share the abundance. So here's the poem. When 68 golden plums appear like a bowl of phosphorescence on your stoop, look both upward and all around you when you give a little thanks. It is no small feat that they have arrived here. Someone planted trees, smiling to themselves at the foolishness of growing plums in this climate where the rain makes everything soft, makes everyone soft. And for more than 100 years, the trees have probably not been tended, but certainly been spared the axe and the lightning and unhappy accidents, and survived to delight you. And this week of softening and relentless rain, someone lifted their hand level with their heart or higher, 68 times to the branches while shaking the weather out of their hair. And doing this, they thought of you. So plunge your clean hands in the bowl. What else is there to do? And pick out the stems and leaves. Tear into the rain-soft flesh, the sun-bright flesh, to pry out the pits. And think of how you will carry forward joy when you leave jars of warm jam on many doorsteps in the morning.
And so that's what you did. You made jam, and secretly and unexpectedly people opened their door and found her. And it wasn't with any note, so they didn't know also who made the jam. It's a wonderful, wonderful image. So you speak very lovingly of your grandparents in your essays and also in your poetry. And since it's December, it's the time of year when we put our gods to bed. Perhaps you wouldn't mind reading another extract from that same essay about your childhood.
In my childhood, we spent long days in my grandparents' backyard cannery, where our whole extended family would gather to process and preserve seasonal harvests. Regardless of what bounty was in front of us, my late grandfather had one unbreakable rule: we waste nothing. When we worked on herring eggs or seaweed, us children would patrol the teeming tables and grade out what was not usable, burying the leftovers deep in the garden beds to break down and enrich the soil once Grandpa's vegetables started growing. Clam and cockle shells were crushed to amend the soil, fish guts were buried by the rhododendron, and even the totes of slimy, bloody water left over from cleaning salmon and halibut were poured across the greenest lawn in Bella Bella. Nourishment was absolute and reciprocal. Part of what I love about gardening is the ritual. It patterns my year and makes me feel close to people like my grandfather, whose ancient rhubarb plants have been split apart and now grow in my own garden. But I also love the sense of agency it gives me. I can walk the linear path of planting a seed, tending a seedling into a healthy plant, and harvesting some small bounty that will feed my loved ones. I can deepen my knowledge of our climate, soil amendment, companion planting, and other factors that help my bounty grow. Compared to much of the rest of my life, gardening brings clarity and regularity.
What does that mean? That last line.
I think one of the things that's been really important to me in my life is that I've always worked in and for my community and grew up in a family where it was very clearly messaged to me from a young age that you do not get to choose when your community calls you to leadership, when your community calls you to do work on its behalf. Your responsibility is to find a way to show up when you're called. And so the work that I do is varied, and often it is very unclear or not very linear. A lot of the work that I've done over the years has related to stewardship of our lands and waters and territory. And often it has not been clear to me how I can be a voice for my community and a voice for my homelands in the face of capitalism and colonialism and patriarchy and all of these crushing oppressive weights that have a real bearing here where we live. And so it's been of utmost importance to me to find the pathways to feeling balanced and stable in that work so that, when my work feels unclear, still I have these tools and these spaces that I can lean on to bring me a sense of stability again.
So when you get that sense of uncertainty, maybe doubting your own capabilities or direction, do you meditate? Do you look for outer voices to come to you? Where does that sense of purpose come from?
For me, it comes in a really deep way from my territory. I'm a very anxious person. I am a person that experiences great self-doubt. I have struggled with my mental health. I have been in lots of situations that were traumatizing and tested the limits of my ability to show up in a good way for the things and the people in the community that I care about. And in the moments of doubt and in the moments where it feels like all of the oppressive things are too much or all of the hard work is too much, I feel really fortunate that I live in a place where I can go out on the land and I can commune with my territory, with my non-human kin. And having grown up in a culture where your sense of identity is taught to you as being inseparable from the place that you come from, it feels so good and so grounding to know that I can go out into the territory and connect with the parts of myself that ground me, that exist outside of my body but are still part of my intrinsic whole.
So that's very fascinating, that expression you just used, communing with your non-human kin. So how do you go about teaching people that weren't raised in that culture and that it almost seems second nature to you? You're talking about it, it's like breathing. How do you get people that aren't in that environment to start to have an appreciation and awareness of that possibility?
I think for me, it often starts with just asserting that in my storytelling, with asserting that in the way that I talk about my territory and the place that I come from. I mean, as I'm raising my own children, it feels very important to raise them in the way that I was raised, to understand that we are part of a system of kin in our territory that all depend on each other to thrive. And there's this sentiment that all flourishing is mutual, all thriving is mutual. It requires something from outside of ourselves to participate, in that reciprocity and that abundance. And it's such a beautiful thing to ask yourself, how can I be an agent of someone else's abundance or something else's abundance? And so when I talk about my territory and when I'm writing essays and writing poetry and sharing things with the world, it feels very important to me to assert that the ravens are my relatives. the wolves are my relatives, the trees are my relatives, and I relate to them with the same sense of familial obligation and familial love that I do to my cousins and my aunts and my uncles and my children. And that may not be a natural way of thinking to most people, although it is, very second nature to me. But I hope that when I talk about it, it makes people curious enough to think to themselves, what would it look like if I tried to have that relationship, or if I tried to recognize my interconnectedness with other beings and realize that that relationship was already there, and that what I need to do is honor it.
It's fascinating because the science has its limits, we all know, but has started to prove some remarkable things now about plants and what happens when you talk to them, and when they're near other plants and when they're near other living things, they seem to thrive. So there's a great deal we don't understand, we in the West, with Western thinking. So your roots are very much in this ancestral territory that you were raised in. And, one could think, of course, this is paradise on some level. I'm sure there are days it is. But of course, you're not immune from the assaults of the modern world. And your ecosystem took a terrible hit in 2017. You had 100,000 gallons of diesel dumped onto your coastline. And you at the time were a young mother expecting your second child. And you said that you felt engulfed in darkness, wanting to believe I was a seed fighting toward light and air. And you said gardening saved you, that it pulled you through the worst of that mental and spiritual anguish, and that you think there's a direct link between gardening and good mental health. So maybe you would talk a little bit more about that experience for you, and also its application to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So this spill occurred in 2016, and at the time I was serving my community as an elected tribal councillor, so I was part of our elected tribal government. And what happened was that in October of that year, in the very early hours of the morning, a US-owned tug and barge ran aground very close to my community, in a part of our territory that we used to refer to as the breadbasket of our nation. It was the place that most families went to harvest dozens of marine and intertidal species that we primarily relied on for sustenance. And in the course of that spill, the area was deeply contaminated. And we faced a 40-day emergency phase trying to raise the grounded tug out of the water and try to capture some of the spilled product that had gone into the system. And because I was, part of our tribal council at the time, and I was holding a portfolio related to stewardship, I was put in the position of being incident commander on behalf of the HELSIC to sort of help govern the response to the disaster, along with the federal and provincial governments and with the polluter. And so for 40 days, I was at the table trying to make decisions around how we could mitigate the horrific damage that was unfolding in this beautiful part of our territory. And we were doing this in the midst of winter storms and booms breaking and contaminants spilling and spreading. And it was risky, and it was terrifying, and it was depressing and traumatizing. And at the end of it, when that emergency phase ended and we were sort of trying to reintegrate back into regular life, we were facing this point where hundreds of people had come into the community to assist with the spill response. And then at the end of the emergency phase, they all left. And we were here as HELSIC people who've been here since time before memory, with archaeological evidence showing that we've been here at least 14,000 years. We've been here forever. We're not going anywhere. And the idea that an external force could come into our territory, decimate such a key part of the territory, and then everybody could just walk away and leave us here alone was devastating. And I know for myself, I struggled really deeply for months, for years after that incident, to understand what my role was as a steward of my culture, of my territory, of my lands and waters, to know that I had been gifted my relationship with this place because my ancestors had cared for it. But the only reason I have a territory to live in and thrive in and love is because my ancestors guarded it and handed it down to me. And then now, on my watch, when I was stewarding it, this horrible thing had happened. It was traumatizing. And one of the most difficult aspects of it for myself, and in conversation from many people in the community, was that we'd sort of all grown up with the sense that we could trust our territory to provide for us, that we could trust in our relationships to places like this for our sustenance, for our stability. And in a community that experiences really high rates of poverty and intergenerational trauma, being able to rely on the territory to provide a basic need like your food is so important. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, through no fault of our own, that relationship had been damaged. We couldn't trust that place anymore. We couldn't trust it to provide for us, and we didn't know how to take care of it because it had been hurt in ways that my ancestors did not give us tools to grapple with. And so as I was struggling in the aftermath of the spill and became pregnant with my second child and was trying to figure out, how can I be a good parent and a good community member and a good steward when I've just been through this and felt like nothing I did was enough. What truly did save me was gardening. I felt like one of the biggest challenges for me was just the loss of a sense of agency, a loss of faith in my own ability to take care of something. And the really simple act of hammering together a raised bed and filling it with soil and planting a seed and growing a plant and then having a vegetable, a handful of peas, a fistful of herbs that I could give to someone else to nourish them and sustain them. That was the level I needed to bring it back to bring a sense of stability back into my routine and to teach myself again that I am capable of manifesting abundance for others, that I am capable of taking care in a good way and then externalizing that for the benefit of other people. And that gardening was a practice for me in the aftermath of the spill. I mean, nothing that I grow in a garden can replace the damage to this entire system as a result of the spill. But at least it gave me back the gift of believing in myself and my own ability to be an agent of good and to see something through.
It's very interesting talking about this because you have such an intimate relationship with your landscape and your ecosystem. It almost sounds like you're talking about the rape of a landscape in a way, that you were totally ill prepared from the very fact you used the word trust, the loss of trust. And you actually said you ended up with post-traumatic stress. Now, most people in our way of thinking wouldn't imagine that an incident like that occurred to an environment could be something that would give you that amount of trauma, because they don't understand the connection and the importance. And I think that's really remarkable that you could be so intimately enmeshed in your environment, and it means so much to you that it could give you that degree of trauma. And you said you set up a community garden for the workers as well, is that right?
Yeah. And so one of the things that we did was we built a community garden, wanting it to be a space where other people could also come and experience that sort of simplification of routine of gardening and learning skills together around that. And we wanted to create a space that was peaceful, that felt beautiful. And we started it in 2017 and it's still thriving today and feeding families in the community. And through that initial seed of the project, we now also support about 150 households in our community to garden at home. So not only do we have the communal gardening space, but we're also building skills in the community to decentralize that work and have everybody growing what they can and sharing what they can across the whole community. And I think that, it really comes back to that idea of, abundance being meaningless unless it is a thing that you can externalize and share with others. So gardening has become another mechanism for that. We can't go to that place where the spill happened and harvest ancestral resources to gift and share and nourish our loved ones, but we can do this in one small way.
How has it repaired that environment since then, in the what's it, 7 years now?
To be honest, I have a hard time going there. I feel a real deep sense of personal shame when I go there, that, although, the spill was not my fault and not something that I could have prevented. And even though I know rationally that I did everything I could in my capacity that I was in to try to mitigate the damage, I still, with the just deeply irrational love that one has for a loved one, believe that I should have found something to do, that I should have been able to fix, that I should have been able to stop it. And so it's a hard place for me to be because I feel like my relationship to that place was damaged. And like that place that I have been intimate with since childhood, because of this, can no longer trust me to be a good caretaker of it. And so that is a relationship that I do feel a deep need to continue trying to repair. And it is beautiful to see forms of life thriving there, but there's also a lot that we don't know around how ecosystems bounce back from diesel spills of that magnitude and the impacts that they have on things like the ability of bivalves to breed. And there's really complex science behind it that is not science that has been inherent in our community and that we've had to learn about and begin to practice so that we can continue tending that place into the future. But it's challenging. It's challenging to be in relationship with a place that is damaged in that way.
You talked about the rhythm of being in the fresh air and putting your hands in the soil. And that process, you said, helped you process grief as well. When your grandmother died, you planted a garden. Maybe you could read Dirt Prayer for us.
What does it mean to feel grounded? Imagine tender roots forming, stretching their small hands outward for nourishment. How do the parts of you that are in contact with the earth form attachment to place? What do you gain from this attachment? Imagine blunt roots, grown roots, reaching outward from your palms as they meet the holy ground. All ground is holy. How is it you've become unshakable, impervious to wind and weather? It is borrowed strength, friend. The soil is our mother. Hold your body against hers when you need comfort. The soil is our mother. She unifies us in our communal need to be held, to be strengthened by roots, to be rooted in strength.
That's beautiful, rooted in strength. Before I ask you about that a little bit more, someone's asked a question here. Is what you're talking about, the relationship with other kin, similar to what they called forest bathing?
I think that forest bathing can be a way that you access that kind of relationship. Forest bathing as a practice, it's not dissimilar to what I do when I go out into the territory and remind myself of who I am by simply being in this landscape that I believe is an extension of my identity. But I think the key part of, the idea behind non-human kin, or what some people call kin-centric ecology, is this idea that other beings that are not people are your family, that you can have the same relationships with them and reciprocal love and understanding and obligations and duties of care that you would with a human family member. And that's the thing that's very second nature in my culture and that I was raised with as a belief, is simply that, the animals in the territory are my relatives, the trees and the plants are our relatives. And that piece, I think, is maybe a step beyond what most people think of and experience when they practice things like forest bathing. But I think that practices like that do help you to access that sense of kinship with everything around you.
So you're almost speaking in a language that needs to be taught to us. I'm sure you've come across that before. And you were worried at first, I think, when you were bringing out your writing, that it wouldn't be understandable to us, to non-native people. And that hasn't proven to be the case, has it?
No, it's been really beautiful to see the ways that people connect with my writing. I think for me, because it's such an insular practice, I write alone and I write out in the territory and I write primarily for myself. The idea of taking something so deeply personal and so deeply local and from this place and then putting it out in the world, I did have misgivings about whether there was going to be any interest in the kind of relationships that I'm talking about and stories that I'm talking about. So I do feel a really deep gratitude that it is accessible to people and that people have been responding really beautifully to it. And it gives me actually a great deal of hope that maybe other learnings and values and ethics and practices and laws of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities could translate as well to a much wider audience in a way that could help us to repair our broader relationships to the world that we live in.
Much needed. So you ended that poem with the words "rooted in strength." I don't know if you can explain, but that fusion of land, all life forms, and spirit seem to render this holistic sense of connection. So does family to you mean something much larger than a blood relative? What is there a word in your language for it?
There isn't a single word in the language for it, but I think that what's interesting is that when you go back to our stories, even as far back as our first generation stories, our creation stories, you see this really seamless narrative talking about people and places and animals and mountains and rivers as animate beings that are in relationship with each other. That is something that is just baked into, the storytelling, the oral history of our people, and then becomes so foundational to our identities. And truly, it feels like those things are an extension of who I am. And I've said before that as a Helsing person, I don't make complete sense anywhere else in the world outside of my territory. I feel like, in a way, you need the territory that is around me to be able to read me through the ways that I relate to it and what it illuminates about me.
Well, you're illuminating a lot about it for us. And this is quite a revelation to me. I mean, obviously, one knows about the legends of Greece and Rome, and Hans Christian Andersen, the Grimm's fairy tales, the tradition of storytelling, and we're all quite familiar with those characters. But I'm no way aware of any kind of mythology that comes from your cultural background. And I think it'd be really fascinating to understand and learn a bit more about it, because clearly you were raised with very different kinds of folk tales than I was. So do you have goddesses? I mean, what is in your hierarchical system? I mean, did you have spirits of the trees? Did it have a name?
I think part of it is that there is very little hierarchy to it. So they're not, we have an idea of a creator, but generally, when you think about a mountain or a river or a wolf or a person, they're all people that you relate to one on one, or beings that you relate to one on one. And there's a series of poems in my book at the very end about mountains. And so one of the very foundational stories that you hear about a lot, right from childhood, one of my earliest memories, is the story of the flood. And, this great flood coming to our territory and threatening our people. And we were not able to save ourselves from the flood. We were saved by mountains as animate beings that recognized that we were in distress and that they had a responsibility to us as their kin to help us to survive. And in that story of the flood, there are two sibling mountains, and one is taller than the other. And the smaller one realizes that, they're not quite tall enough to be above the flood, but they need to save these people. And so the taller mountain lends some of their height to the smaller mountain, so that you can go right to the top and be above the flood waters. And that was one of my first introductions to this idea that mountains are animate beings. Mountains care for us. Mountains have demonstrated their care for us. We survive today because of the acts of love of mountains. And those are beings that I have a responsibility to thank and to remember and to name and to care for and to visit and to reciprocate the gifts that they have given to us. And as I've gone through the sort of personal journey of understanding my relationship to those two mountains from the flood story in particular, that was a source of really deep learning about myself and my territory and how I want to be in relation to what is around me. And so there's a whole series of poems at the end of the book thinking about the flood and thinking about those mountains and thinking about what we have to learn from them and what we can give them back in return.
It's beautiful. It's quite an abstract thing, isn't it, really? We're talking about the larger mountain lending some of its strength or height to the other mountain. That's kind of an abstract thing for a kid to take on board. It's very powerful.
It is, but having climbed both of those mountains as an adult, I can tell you that when you go to the top of the smaller mountain, at the summit, the rocks look different. They don't look like what you see as you're climbing up to the height. You get to a certain height, and then from here above, it looks very different. It looks like the top of the other mountain. Like geologically, it looks similar. And so it's an abstract idea, but also when you're in those physical spaces, it's so easy to see and to believe in those interrelationships.
Wow. Talking about this, suspending our conventional thinking for a minute, I speak for myself, to open up to possibility. I kind of like to know a bit more about the role of spirits or ghosts. Luath, the word for a ghost, is one of your poems. Perhaps you would read it and then maybe tell us a little bit about what the presence of ancestral spirits or ghosts mean in the culture, and why is it important?
There's a bunch of small poems in a series here. So one, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's kitchen. Set out 4 cups of tea, one for each of us, one for the guest who may soon, we hope, cross the threshold, and one for the ghosts who feel safe here. Everyone is nourished in this place. 2, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's bedroom. What's on the walls or between the walls is of no real consequence to us. What makes this space safe is love who, with scarred and swollen knuckles, turns away hardness at the door and gently closes it behind us again. 3, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's living room. You must always know who needs a place to rest. You must always know who might be hungry. 4, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's attic. Every exhale expended in this house is stacked in here, this wooden lung, this library of breath. Snorts of anger scoring the wood erratically as though sharp-cornered boxes and blunt furniture were tossed in here. Sighs of pleasure, smoothing the grain to a high gleam, the whole place polished by how breaths belatedly let go. 5, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's garden. Which one is the prayer? The crocus, the lily, or the tenacious weed? Which one is the answer? The crimson rhubarb casting broad shadows, the feral blackberry pushing up from underneath the gate? 6, these are the poems I write in my grandmother's absence. Your house is full of little altars, your dresser, your windowsill, but you are the prayer, the flower, you are the love, you are the guest we will wait for until we're ghosts. You are the ghost we nourish.
Okay, that's amazing. So you are the ghost we nourish. What does that actually mean?
I mean, I think it's another layer of abstraction that, in addition to being raised with the idea that what surrounds me is my kin, even if it is not human, I've also been raised with the belief that my ancestors are my kin in a very present way, and that my responsibilities to them and their responsibilities to me don't end with death. And so there are many rituals and ceremonies that we participate in that are about remembering and gifting back to our ancestors. And we think about them in very present terms. And, I think it's really beautiful how simple that is to children. It sometimes feels hard and strange to hold as an adult. But when my grandmother passed away, my kids were, maybe 4 and 6. And when she passed away, they were sad. They were deeply sad. We'd cared for her in her home for the last 2 years of her life, and they had been with me every weekend for 2 years, helping to physically take care of her. So some of their earliest memories are being in her home in her old age, helping to take care of their great granny. And they were sad when she passed away, but they also just had this immediate idea that clicked in for them that it's okay because she's an ancestor now. And because she's an ancestor, she's here. She's around us. She's here all the time. We don't have to wait to the weekend when we go to take care of her to talk to her. We can talk to her anytime. When we need her guidance, we don't have to wait until we're physically in front of her. She's with us always. And so there's just this immediate sense that locks into place that, when people pass away, they're no longer physically in front of you, but they are in another way all around you, and that your relationship with them doesn't simply end, that you're not just grieving and then letting go and then it's gone, but that you are grieving and then transforming your relationship to fit a different model. And so that's brought me a lot of comfort, as people that I love have passed away, knowing that because of the beliefs that I hold and the way that I was raised, I have great comfort in knowing that they are with me and that I can still take care of them and that I can feel the ways that they take care of me.
We've got some nice messages from audience members here. A nice comment. I'm so proud of you, Jess. As Helsink woman, I'm so happy you shared this with the world. It makes sense to me and speaks volumes in connecting the dots for me, learning about who I am as a Helsink and the reasonings of the values I hold. A lot I can relate to. So that's very nice. Russ Cohen, very long question you'll find in the Q&A, but here's the final bit. Don't we nevertheless need to do what we can to repair the damage and restore kinship relationships in the landscapes we respectively live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really deep question and a really real answer. We have to find ways to be in loving and open relationships with places and beings that are damaged. And that is hard. It's hard and it's scary and it's vulnerable and feels to me as delicate as being in relationship with a person who is traumatized. I think about the ways that I relate to loved ones in my life who have experienced trauma and hardship and the sense of, deep obligation and love that I feel to help them in their healing, but how delicate that feels and how fragile it can feel and how uncomfortable I often am with the question of whether I have the tools to support that healing and to be in relationship with that person who needs me in that really deep way. And in the same way, I carry all those same feelings when I try to figure out how to be in relationship with parts of my territory that are damaged. And realistically, you look at the planet around us and the deep scarring impact of capitalism and colonialism on all of the places where we live and breathe. There is no pristine place. There is no perfect, untouched place that has not been marred by the modern world. It is all impacted, and we are impacted, and we have to figure out and navigate the messy, vulnerable way of being in relationship anyway, knowing that you cannot repair things back to their original state. There's no going back to when things were perfect and whole. You have to figure out how to be in messy, loving, mutually healing relationship as the damaged and uncomfortable beings and places that we are. And I don't have any roadmap to the right way to do that, but I think that holding yourself and sitting in that uncomfortable space of knowing that you have to ask that question, how can I help you heal? It's such fundamental work that we all need to do. And I think that the thing that I struggle with is that it feels easy to be disconnected. It feels so much easier to just close your eyes and walk away and say, I can't look at that. That's too hard. That's too big. I can't fix it. So I just want to put my blinders on. It's so easy. It's easy to feel that way. But you have to learn how to be in connection with the things that hurt and the things that are messy and the things that are imperfect and the things that need healing. Because sometimes that's us and we need those things to be in a relationship with us too.
Someone's written here, what can one non-native ally at a time do to help us all live together in a more livable future?
A really good question. I think that one of the most fundamentally difficult things for me as an Indigenous person when I'm out in the wider world is having to constantly assert and defend my own existence and humanity. And the more others can do that for me, the easier my life becomes. There's this pervasive idea that Indigenous people aren't real, that we were extinct, that we were conquered, we were vanquished, we're gone, that we're not, real, present, thriving people who continue to flourish in our homelands in spite of all the odds. And I think that the more society at large and individuals can recognize and name and affirm that we are here. We're here and we are worthy of being in relationship, and there are mutual obligations and relationships that need to be upheld. It's such a small thing, but such a fundamental thing. And I think that one easy pathway for people is maybe learning about whose territory you're on, and figuring out, who are those people? What are they doing today? How can you support them and be in relationship with them where you are? I live in a part of the world that isn't heavily populated, but I think often about the generations and generations of people that have come from this place and the things that they've done to help it thrive and the ways that they've thrived here. And it's just, I think, a really beautiful question to ask. Whose land am I on? What benefit do I derive from being here and flourishing here? Who's enabling me to flourish and be where I am? Who's cared for this place so that it is a place where I can be? And is there something that I can gift back in return? Some respect, some recognition, some way of upholding them? That'll look different for different people depending on where they are, but it's a practice I encourage wherever you are.
It's funny listening to you talk. There's this overwhelming theme that pervades what you're saying, which is all to do with gratitude. It seems to preface every value that you have about giving back, about sharing, about what does this person need? What can I do? Who provided it? It's a very different kind of language than we're used to hearing. And somebody has actually said, about, do you experience, she said, when I write in English, I rely on metaphor and poetry because English doesn't have words for much of what I learned growing up. All I'm left with are the concepts. Does Jess experience the same thing?
I do. And I think one thing that I really struggle with is there are things that I know because I've seen them and because I've heard them and because I've pulled them out of stories and I've witnessed them in the ways that people interact around me, or I've picked them up from my own relationship with my landscape, but they're not necessarily things that I can name well in English. And I can't speak my language fluently. I'm 37 years old and I am in the first generation in my family where no one was forcibly removed to residential school and beaten for speaking their own language. I'm 37. I'm the first generation in my family where no one was forcibly taken away. That is such recent history. And my grandparents spoke English fluently, and some of my older aunts and uncles grew up when they were very young, speaking it fluently. And for them, English was a second language that was introduced very early in their life. But in my generation, English is our first language. It is the only language that I speak fluently. And there's so much that has been done to damage our relationship to our own language, which operates in a very different way from English. Our language is really deeply relational. The words that you use and the names that you have for things often really relate to how you use the thing, how you exist in the place, how you relate to the place, what the history is there. It's not just a simple noun. It is an encapsulation of a relationship or an interaction. And so there are ideas and ethics and values and beliefs that are in me that I don't know how to express in English, but I also can't express in my own language because that was literally beaten out of my family. And there's beautiful work being done in my community by so many incredible people who I uphold as absolute heroes to save our language and to support the resurgence of our language and to make it a vital part of our community again and a vital part of our community's thriving. And I hope someday that I can engage deeply in that learning and be fluent in Helsik and have that other way of expressing myself. But right now, that's not a thing that I have available to me. That is hard and sad.
Okay, let's get to the next question. I've got more of my own. You mentioned the word ceremony in your writing. You say, this is how we utter ceremony, and ceremony builds bridges across the darkness. A blanket gifted or loaned, an armful of kindling, a prayer. So it doesn't have to be formal, the ceremony, or does it?
Not at all. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time in a posture that people would associate with prayer. I don't spend a lot of time on my knees with my hands together or anything like that. I mean, there are formal ceremonies that take place, and I cherish the time that I can spend in our ceremonial houses and engaged in a very active like participation in our culture. But I also feel like I am able to live ceremony in the small ways that I interact with everything around me. That if I am recognizing and naming and upholding my non-human kin that's around me, that in itself is an act of ceremony, that it doesn't have to be this big formal thing that I do separate from my day-to-day life, but it is my day-to-day life, is the practice of deep connection and the ways that I externalize it. I'm so sorry. I'm off grid and there is a generator that has just come on. So I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but there might be a little bit of a hum.
No, we can't. We can't.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly whiz to this kind of general movement in terms of embracing of native values or trying to understand them. That seems to be a national trend in the last few years. So Robin Wall Kimmerer had this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teaching of Plants. And that was an unexpected bestseller. And how much of this do you think is due to young people's general disenchantment with seeing that they can't rely on the government for anything except business as usual, and the present power structure and value system isn't going to save us? Do you think there's any of that behind this?
And I love that Braiding Sweetgrass has become a bestseller, and it has been around for a while, and to see it burst into a much bigger scene, I think is just indicative of how people are craving the sense of hope and connectivity that comes from texts like that. And one thing that I think is really beautiful, I mean, obviously I'm mostly in relationship with youth in my own community. One thing that I think is so beautiful and gives me so much hope is how little reverence youth have for capitalism and patriarchy and the state. That there is just the sense that what they feel allegiance to is one another and the work that they have to do to repair and uphold our culture and our relationship to place. And it is so stunningly beautiful to me, the joy and the hope that can emerge when the thing that you focus on is not all of these institutions that limit you or extract from you. But what you say is, I am here for you. I am here for myself. I am here for our community and our territory and our language and culture. And I am here for connection. I mean, at the root of all harm in this world at some level is disconnection, whether that's imposed disconnection or willful disconnection. And I think that anybody who is choosing to be connected and striving to be connected in spite of the ways that that can be hard and messy and vulnerable is doing such courageous and important work. And the people who are doing it more than any other demographic I see are young people who will not choose the hopeless future that is being put upon them. And that teaches me so much and emboldens me so much to show up in a good way for the future they are creating. And I think that when you look at what is becoming popular in society at large, and you look at things like Braiding Sweetgrass and these texts that are gospels of connectivity and beauty and love, it's just such a strong indication to me that what people are craving is connection and is hope in spite of everything.
That's good to hear. I also like the fact she said indigenous science is a more holistic way of knowing. In Western science, often for good reason, we separate our values and our knowledge. In indigenous science, knowledge and values are always coupled. It's an ethically driven science. So you're basically bearing that out by what you're saying you're picking up. Is this in your own community education program? You're picking this stuff up as feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really privileged to co-teach a university field class that is out on the land, where I'm working with a Western scientist co-instructor. We're co-developing the curriculum together, and the two of us recognize that he is a Western scientist, I am an indigenous scientist, and we are co-teaching with the land. The land is a co-teacher in that class that we recognize and uphold every day in our connections with our students. And it is so possible to do that work in a way that is more deeply rooted. And I think that is one beautiful example of what that I love in the way that I work, and something that really shines so beautifully in Braiding Sweetgrass and other books like it.
That's good to hear. Well, we're getting tons more questions now, just when we've got 5 minutes left. Well, you had another essay, and it was actually an interview with an essay, also in the Tyee. And I was wondering, Kimura says that we have to fight back so we're not complicit in our own destruction. And I know you've been involved in like campaign work on pipelines and such. You said this is not easy work, but show up in your imperfection and do the work anyway. I don't have to be perfect to do good. Talk a little bit more about that, because it must be hard for you if you're a naturally anxious person to have to go into a confrontational situation about these things.
I mean, I'm a deeply conflict averse person, which is not something most people would assume about me, because I have spent a lot of my life doing very outward facing, high conflict, very visible work in the public eye, campaign work, organizing work, direct action. And for me, it comes back to that teaching from my grandparents that you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose the work that's laid out for you. You don't get to choose the moment when you're called to that work. You just have a choice of how you're going to show up, how you're going to respond. You know, the community is going to call on you. Your people are going to call on you when they need you and how they need you. And it's up to you to figure out how to be okay with that, how to show up in a good way. And that's been hard and scary work for me, because I ask myself all the time, how could I possibly be the right person for this? How could I possibly be the only person for this? How could I possibly have the skills and the tools that I need to do this work well when it is so critical and so urgent? Like, how could it be me? Surely it is a mistake. But really the answer is that it's all of us. It's all of us. And if we wait until we're perfectly healed and perfectly skilled and perfectly ready, no one will ever do anything. And what I can do with what I have, where I am in the moment that I'm in, that's the gift that I have to give. And when I come from a culture that believes that gifting back is, you know, very core and at the root of who you are and what you do, I have to ask myself all the time, what is the gift that I have to give right now?
Wow, this is quite uplifting. It could be very depressing because, you know, there's a lot in the world and in the environment to be extremely depressed about. If anyone's following COP28, they'll agree with me, I'm sure. However, you say you return to your special landscape because, well, it feeds you and heals you like a medicine. And you say, to know the whole of me, I feel you need this whole landscape that is around me as a translation guide. And this big, beautiful territory underpins everything I am. That's such a beautiful statement. So perhaps in summing that up, you wouldn't mind reading the title poem, Crushed Wild Mint, while we still have time.
The pea is a spirit. Braid your hair, then ask that spirit how it needs to be loved. If you are someone who feeds the living, ask yourself how to nourish a ghost. Set 3 places at the table for the 2 of you and for grief. Crush wild mint and put it in your pockets, in your hair, in a bowl on the table. Let the scent cleanse grief like smoke, like cedar, like tenderness.
That's beautiful. Okay, one last poem. We've just got enough time, I think. Since wilderness is what you love and where you live, maybe we could close on the wilderness poem.
Read this one. When I was on tour with my book in October, I was about halfway through when someone in the audience confronted me and asked why I wasn't reading love poems. So this is my favorite love poem in the book. I will love you into the grave, yours or mine. I say this not to be ghoulish, but with the simple authority of crushed mint or migratory birds arriving and departing. This is dependent on nothing. It is without conditions. I will love you into the grave, yours or mine. If yours, I will plant wild roses at your feet and tell stories to the sweet insects that chatter against your bones beneath the black earth. I will make them reckon with your goodness, and we will tally up together the enormity of your loving. I will love you into the grave, yours or mine. If mine, I will go to it quietly like an animal to the wakeless forest when its time has come. I will have nothing left to ask for. I will have come home and home again every day of my life to rest in the wilderness of your love.
Well, what a spectacular image to end upon. We do have a lot more questions there, Jess, which we didn't get to. So I don't know if you'll have time to type any sort of responses. They're very good questions too. Well, let's do one. In this season of Christmas and holidays, what occasions are they that you celebrate?
I enjoy celebrating solstice with my children. You know, it's such a struggle to get them up in the morning and out the door when it's still dark outside. And so being able to count down to the day when we know that from that point on, the days will be getting longer feels like such an important moment to focus on.
Is that the 21st of December? Yeah. It's an interesting one. Yeah. I always remember that myself, that the days get longer after that. It is a cause for celebration. Well, I would love to stay on longer. This has been very beautiful, but also very illuminating for me, and I'm sure for lots of other people, to learn more about your culture and your way of thinking, which I think is just remarkable. I don't know why we're not teaching it in schools, but that's another story. Okay, so lots of wisdom in that book. If anyone gets a chance, tell people how they can order it. I know there's some problems with it's not yet available, is it? You know, in the United States.
It releases in the US in March, but it can be pre-ordered. So there is a pre-order link in the chat, or you can go to indiebound.org and search for Crushed Wild Knit. That's indiebound.org, and you can place a pre-order there, and then it will be the first to receive it when it comes out in the US in March.
Very good. Well, it's done very well already. I know it's in another print run in Canada, right? Okay, Cambridge Forum is made possible through the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, the Mass Cultural Council, Cambridge Community Foundation, and of course, all of you will be getting a nice letter from me shortly asking for you to continue supporting us. You can also donate on the website, www.cambridgeforum.org. And you can also go there just to sign up for the e-newsletter, which is, of course, totally free of charge. Well, I'd like to thank you again, Jess, for making the time to talk to us. Good luck with the writing, and I hope to see everyone again soon. Bye-bye.